Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to join you today at your conference. I wanted to begin with a sad topic because a number of you in the business community have reached out to us in the Labor family following the passing of our colleague and friend, Kimberley Kitching, and it means a lot to us that you have. Kimberley spoke with a bravery and a clarity which isn't common enough in my line of work. She was courageous when it came to human rights, compassionate on behalf of health workers, and she was fierce and fun. And so I wanted to begin today by saying that our thoughts are with Kimberley's loved ones at a really heartbreaking time. Can I acknowledge the traditional owners of this part of the world, and can I thank Anna Bligh, who I've known for a really long time now, and also Peter, and congratulate him on picking up the chair of a really important institution. Can I thank Tiki for running the show today? Haven't seen you in this room for about 48 hours or so. It's nice to see you again. I'm sure you're directing traffic with characteristic skill and good humour. And I wanted to thank all of you for the chance today to say a few words after some incredibly senior people have made contributions too. Of course, Phil Lowe, the CEOs and the regulators, and I acknowledge the regulators here as well. And then we're going to have a discussion in a moment. But before that, I also wanted to convey my gratitude to all of you for all of the deferrals and the fee waivers and the restructuring and the refunds that you provided Australians and their small businesses during the pandemic, during the fires, and now during the floods. And on a personal level, I wanted to say how much I've appreciated the way that the leaders of this crucial industry have engaged with me directly and frequently, informally, generously and candidly, particularly over the last 2 or 3 years. And it's the perfect time to catch up once again, about 2 weeks from a budget and about 2 months from an election. At a time when the recovery in the economy is underway, but it's being buffeted, as you know, by rising inflation, falling real wages and skill shortages, which I think are the defining 3 issues in our economy, made more challenging by natural disasters and global uncertainty. And having spent almost all of this week in Sydney doing a number of investor briefings and boardroom discussions, consulting with CEOs from a range of industries, I know that there is some anxiety about those issues. And what matters, of course, is how we respond to them. It matters, when central banks raise interest rates and by how much. It matters how and when consumers respond to these inevitable rate rises, especially for many people without a buffer, but also for others, how they unleash hundreds of billions of dollars in accumulated savings into our economy. It matters how global markets react to rising energy prices and all the other economic consequences of the war in Ukraine, recognising, though, that inflation and wage stagnation hasn't just suddenly appeared in the last fortnight. For governments, it matters how we rebuild after the floods, how we lock in the recovery, how we lift the longer-term speed limits on the economy by investing more wisely in the drivers of productivity and the right kind of growth. And this demands from us near-term and longer-term thinking at the same time. Now, this challenge, this inflection point, perched between the big shocks of the past and the big opportunities of the future, would be very familiar to all of you in the banking sector. You're moving from a period of change imposed by governments following the necessary recommendations of the Royal Commission, from a period of uncertainty imposed by a virus and natural disasters and now an act of inexcusable Russian aggression, to a period of change imposed by accelerating consumer preferences and changing technologies. And having spent so much time with you and with Anna and with all of your team, I know how much this is occupying your minds. And that's why Stephen Jones and I have been so insistent in seeing the Royal Commission recommendations bedded down, because we know that there has been a great deal of regulatory change before, during and after Hayne, and we want you to be able to digest it and move on. We want to maximise confidence in your industry and move forward together. And the future directions are really clear. Australians are big adapters and big adopters, and we are moving away from cash at one of the fastest rates in the world. That RBA data shows that cash is just 32% of in-person payments, much less than what we see in comparable countries. The same is true of digital wallet transactions, which the CommBank estimates increased by 90% between March 20 and March 21. Now more than 40% of combined debit and credit card contactless transactions are via a digital wallet. No wonder payments infrastructure is such a primary focus for you in the banks. And apart from that new payments platform that was introduced in 2018, much of the regulatory architecture governing payments was created some decades ago. It predates the significant innovations in the sector like mobile payments. And it lacks coherent oversight to address the complexity of issues and the pace of innovation in the sector. So if we take, for example, the growing role that technology companies are playing in the payment space. Now, like you, we'll be monitoring closely the findings of the ACCC's investigation of Apple Pay. We know you've got concerns around buy now, pay later. And I've told Anna that we are happy to swap views on least cost routing for payments, and I look forward to that discussion. Obviously, we need a comprehensive long-term plan that considers these types of challenges for the future of regulation, so that businesses can innovate and invest with certainty, so we can boost resilience, so we can address the risks of enhanced financial crime, and so we can maintain adequate competition in the sector. Now, Australians have shown a willingness to embrace other financial technologies as well. That recent survey data shows we're one of the biggest adopters of cryptocurrencies on a per capita basis in the world. Now, economists think of money as having three roles: a store of value, a unit of account, and a medium of exchange. And many are sceptical that crypto has proven itself in any of these areas just yet. But as global prices skyrocket, we may see even more investment in crypto for a range of reasons. And one is because their independence means they're perceived, rightly or wrongly, as a hedge against all that inflation. But before they can become mainstream, we'll need to confront issues that arise from the emergence of digital currencies and the escalating role of big tech in our financial system. By their nature, these developments make it difficult for regulators to have full visibility of all that's going on in the sector and for all the activity to be captured within the bounds of current regulation. Just this week, President Biden signed an executive order calling for additional measures to address the risks and harness the potential benefits of digital assets. Now, here in Australia, we see two sets of challenges. The first relates to consumer risk and preferences. The RBA has warned that consumers with digital assets are increasingly open to cyber attacks and IT malfunctions. And in a crisis, deposits held in these assets won't be backed by a government guarantee in the same way that savings in a traditional Australian bank would. We also know that certain forms of crypto are exceptionally volatile. The second set of challenges are instability and volatility, and they go to the resilience and the knock-on effects for the system as a whole. So for governments and alternative governments, this means considering the limit of monetary and fiscal policy in a world where Australian dollar usage decreases, the implications in a national crisis if foreign institutions aren't incentivised to act in our national interest, the tax treatment for foreign institutions that disadvantages domestic players, the risk of increased financial crime because of digital asset anonymity, and very relevant right now, the potential weakening of international diplomacy in a world where financial sanctions are becoming key levers in state disputes. The US Treasury Department warned of this at the end of last year in a review of its sanctions program, and those concerns may be playing out as we speak. Bitcoin jumped over 10% on the 28th of February this year after the US imposed sanctions on Russia. The European Central Bank and other, Christine Lagarde and other EU senior officials were considering new measures just over a week ago to ensure digital assets are not being used to dodge EU sanctions. And Russia's been developing its own central bank digital currency now for some time, which it admitted in October 2020 was at least in part designed to resist future sanctions. So our aim for the system is to balance these risks and opportunities by supporting the important role that established institutions play in providing stability and resilience in the system, fostering innovation and competition from new and emerging technologies and from thriving small businesses, and empowering regulators and facilitating regulation that is as agile as the sector itself. To do this, Labor will support or devise sensible measures that would protect consumers, ease pressure for small business, make the rules and regulations clear, and support investment and innovation. For example, making sure that payments regulation facilitates new and emerging systems being part of the regulatory structure. Meaningfully progressing the conversation underway on a central bank digital currency, giving consumers greater control over and protection of their data. Now, several payment system reviews by the Reserve Bank and by Treasury have already been completed, and the final report of the Senate Committee into Australia as a Technology and Financial Centre has already been handed down last year. Now, whoever wins this election in a couple of months' time will inherit all of this thinking and another round of consultations and considerations that are due to be handed down between the middle and the end of this year. On the payment system, around additional powers for the Treasurer and the changes necessary to modernise payments legislation to accommodate new and emerging systems. On crypto, around establishing a licensing framework for digital currency exchanges, a custody and depository regime for crypto assets, a map of cryptocurrencies and tokens that exist already, and around decentralised autonomous organisations. And from the Board of Tax on the taxation of digital assets, from the Council of Financial Regulators on debanking, and from Treasury and the RBA on the feasibility of a retail central bank digital currency. Now, obviously, a lot of this is complex and it requires consultation by you and with you, and we recognise that. And where we do have plans or thoughts, we'll identify them and we'll be upfront with you and the sector and work through them with industry, whether it's in payments or in other areas. We want to see instant transactions and lower transaction costs, stability, security, trust, and a level playing field for competition and change. All of that is vital to a more productive, more efficient, more competitive economy that works for more people, and that's our overarching objective. Now, we have said on a number of occasions that we would prefer, if we were a new government, to be inheriting some more developed thinking from our predecessors. But equally, we haven't pretended, and we don't pretend now, that this is all easily fixed with a press release dashed out from opposition. More appropriately, it's a big agenda for us to tackle together if Labor is given the opportunity in a couple of months' time. I look forward to that, and I look forward to the discussion with Anna and her questions, and I thank you again for having me here today.
Well, thank you very much for all of that, Jim. There was plenty of meaty topics for us to get into in the questions. But can I just start by thanking you very much for accepting our invitation to be here and to do it in person. I am acutely aware of the suburbs of Brisbane that you represent, and that many of them have been very seriously affected by the floods, and that you've done a lot of good work with your neighbourhoods, but it's not an easy time for anyone who's representing constituents going through all of that.
Thanks, Anna. Please don't tell them I'm here.
So look, I thought I might just start at the macro. Jim, you talked a little bit about some of those issues, but we are facing an economy. Whoever inherits the Treasury benches will be having to grapple with an economy that's got a lot of uncertainty and volatility in it, from Russia to inflation, natural disasters and the drag that might be on a federal budget in the short term, a great deal of uncertainty about what might happen next, and an environment of still very stagnant wages and the possibility of interest rate rises. So I'm just interested in how Labor is thinking about that challenge.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I see, obviously interest rate rises are an inevitability. Nobody in this room or anyone in Australia would assume that we will have interest rates at or near zero forever. And so I think that is clearly one of the things that people, whether it's corporate Australia or communities, are very focused on. If you think about in the US, the prospect of rising interest rates is having a big impact on sentiment and economic activity there. And so I see that in some ways as an inevitability. If you look at the last 2 years, we've had a series of false starts where we thought that the recovery was about to be strong, and then for one reason or another, something has intervened to cruel that recovery. And so there's some confidence that we're at the beginning of a decent, enduring recovery now, but also we need to be really careful not to be complacent about it. And the three things that worry me most, the three things that worry I'm sure many of you most, is that combination of inflation, what that means for falling real wages and living standards, and skill shortages. All of you would be having some difficulty attracting people at the moment, which is hard to understand given we still have some spare capacity in the labour market. So what would we do about it? Clearly in the near term, we need to be supporting communities like the ones that you were kind enough to mention, Anna. There is a rebuilding task, and we also need to be careful as support for the economy is withdrawn over time. We need to make sure that we don't pull the rug out from under the recovery in how we manage the budget. That's the near-term task. But the kind of medium-term and longer-term task is crucial too. And we think of it as how do we invest more wisely in lifting the speed limit in the economy without adding unnecessarily to those inflationary pressures. So from our point of view, the energy transition is crucial. I was pleased that Phil Lowe was talking about that this morning. Clearly we need to do something meaningful in TAFE and training in universities to deal with these skills shortages. We need to invest in the digital economy as people make decisions not just about how they work but where they work is crucial. We need a bigger labour market, and a big part of that is getting childcare right, treating it as an economic reform and not some kind of social security. And we also need to be thinking about co-investment in the big employers and the big opportunity generators and the big wealth creators of the future. And so some co-investment between government and the private sector, whether it's hydrogen or whether it's battery manufacturing or the care economy or the services economy, to make sure that we're helping create some of those opportunities. Those, I think, would be our big priorities in the economy. If we're given the chance, and you think about the first budget of an Albanese government, those will be the sorts of things that would feature.
Great, thanks. As you acknowledged, the Governor of the Reserve Bank opened our conference, and the theme of our conference is planning for the future. And after remarking on how impossible that is, because the future keeps changing, he spoke to three items directly. Firstly, the need to be planning for and prepared for an environment of interest rate rises, to be planning for the changing nature of money, and to be planning for the decarbonisation of the economy and the role that banks will have in that. I'm not going to ask you to speculate on interest rate rises. There's a whole room full of bank economists that are doing that. But I might start with climate change, because I think this week's an interesting week to be thinking about the role of banking in climate change. The mere fact that the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank, after 25 years, has moved out of the bank to go and work right at the heart of the decarbonisation challenge, I think is very symbolic of just the rapidly growing role that banking and finance is playing here and globally in understanding the opportunities of this transition. So I'd be interested in your views as potential treasurer in how you see this industry's role in that process, and how you would see the role of government in working with this industry to make it easier for that to happen.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I'm such a big supporter of Phil Lowe's is he genuinely understands this transition, this energy transition, the fact that Getting our emissions down is part of the story, but getting our energy costs down, getting cleaner and cheaper energy into the system is arguably our most pressing economic reform before us. And he understands that. I think it's terrific to see the way that the Reserve Bank has engaged in that conversation. Also, our regulators, I pay tribute to Wayne and Joe and all the regulators who are engaged in this too, domestically and internationally, and to corporate Australia. I think one of the things that we would like to change, trying not to couch this in kind of partisan terms, but one of the things that we would like to change is, for a long time now, corporate Australia, the regulators, other parts of our economy have been leading the way in welcome ways when it comes to climate change and energy policy, and we would like the government to show some leadership too. And that's why we do have a comprehensive climate change policy out there. And one of the reasons why our policy has not become part of the daily back and forth of the political contest is because of the way that the major institutions in our economy have come behind it. The BCA and the AI Group and ACCI and others are broadly supportive of our plan, and that, I think, is another symbol. You talked about a symbol that people are looking to the future here. I think that's another important symbol too. The fact that Guy Debelle has gone to work in this sector, I think, is a great sign. And I know Guy Debelle. I worked with him during the global financial crisis when I was in a different role. He's obviously, one of the more impressive people that we've had operating at the Reserve Bank and in our economy more broadly. He has a passion for climate policy, and I think it's terrific that he has an opportunity to do that more prominently in the private sector. And also, there's an opportunity now at the Reserve Bank to renew and to promote more women into senior ranks and to do some of that important institutional renewal as well. And so we wish Guy Debelle the best. I'm sure you do too. He'll be successful at whatever he turns his hand to. And I'm grateful to Phil for the emphasis that he, under his leadership and the bank, has given to climate change policy, getting emissions down, but also getting costs down.
Thanks. It's certainly occupying a lot of the thinking of senior teams and boards right across the sector, and I think we'll continue to do so. So I have a question here from the audience, Jim, which sort of comes in on the back of that. Given the behaviours of Russia and our dependency on China for so much of our manufactured goods, is enough being done to make Australia more self-sufficient in the energy, given we still depend on imported petrol and diesel to drive our economy, and manufacturing sectors?
We have to find the sweet spot here. Not just what's happening in Ukraine, but also, of course, the pandemic, the way that some have been kind of punished for having long and complex supply chains. There is a big rethink going on in every part of our economy about what does the post-pandemic world look like, even absent the additional complications of the war in Ukraine. How do we make our supply chains less complex, less risky? And how do we do that without, pretending that every single element of every single business can or should be carried out here in Australia? So everybody's trying to do that thinking. From a government point of view or an alternative government point of view, what we're trying to do is to say there are a lot of industries where it hasn't made sense for some time, but particularly doesn't make sense now for so much of the value adding to be done elsewhere. And that's why we have proposed a national reconstruction fund. We've got a policy around a future made in Australia, which is to say that there are areas, particularly in regional Queensland, but elsewhere around the country, where we can be doing more value adding. We can be de-risking and decomplicating some of those supply chains. When it comes to energy specifically, clearly one of the big, most consequential impacts of what's happening in Ukraine is going to be the impact on energy prices. I think it's really important that we don't pretend that this pressure just appeared 14 or 15 days ago. There's been pressure on petrol prices here in Australia for longer than that. But that's the big concern. If you talk to our exporters, a lot of the industries that are put under most pressure by what's happening there, we generate a lot of national income from. obviously gas is a big part of the story, but food and fibre as well. There's going to be a food security issue in Europe when you consider that a quarter of the world's wheat comes out of Russia. And so in a very specific sense, a lot of our industries may generate more national income out of this disruption. But the overarching global uncertainty will weigh on us as well, and how the relative ups and downs of that shakes out remains to be seen. But I think that there is a task for all of us to work out what have we learned about our supply chains, what have we learned about our markets, how do we finance that better, and as governments, how do we lead the necessary changes most effectively?
Now I'm going to get in trouble because we've just run out of time, but I'm going to ask one last question because I think it's important, but you will have to give a short answer, okay? As I said, the other area that the Governor touched on which I think is really central to our deliberations and the challenges that we're grappling with, is the changing nature of money. And he identified 4 areas where he believed a government needed, with a sense of urgency, to start thinking about legislating, and they were in expanding the powers of the Reserve Bank in relation to the vastly changing nature of payment system, putting in place a suitable regulatory regime around stablecoins, moving on a tiered licensing regime, and the regulation of crypto assets. Unusual for an industry association to ask for regulation, but I think we would all agree that it's very hard to digitise the economy without having a regulatory framework that's equipped to deal with those sorts of things. So your views?
Yeah, agree.
Okay, that was a great short answer.
The key for us, as I tried to indicate towards the end of my contribution before, is there is a lot of complexity there, and we don't want to throw out the upside of innovation as we try and work out the best kind of regulation. But clearly, from opposition, even from government, we don't intend to kind of go it alone on that stuff. There'll be a lot of conversations with the RBA, a lot of conversations with yourself and with the regulators to try and make sure we get it perfectly right.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, can you join me in thanking Jim for his time? Great to hear some of your views, Jim.